9 years ago, the Roman Empire suffered humiliation so deep it scarred its soul. 3 legions annihilated in the Teutoburg forest, their eagles lost, their bones left to rot. But Rome never forgets. Now, the young general Germanicus leads a massive force across the Rhine into the untamed wilds of Germania to hunt the man who dealt that blow. Arminius, once Rome's ally, now its deadliest enemy. Their fates will collide on the open plains of Idistaviso, where rivers and forests will witness a storm of steel. This is not just a battle and its vengeance, written in blood. To really understand the ferocity of what was coming, we have to go back to the darkness of the Teutoburg forest. The architect of that Roman nightmare was a man named Arminius. Now, this was no wild barbarian chieftain. Arminius was a prince of the Cherushi tribe, but he'd been raised in Rome as a noble hostage. He spoke Latin, was granted Roman citizenship, and even rose through the ranks of the Roman military to become a knight. He knew Roman tactics, Roman strategy, and the Roman mindset. He knew exactly how the machine of the Roman army worked, and more importantly, how to break it. Using his inside knowledge, he fed Varus fake reports of a local rebellion. He lured the 3 legions off their safe, established routes, and into a narrow, muddy track, boxed in by dense forest and impassable swamps. It was the perfect killing ground. For days, Germanic warriors who moved easily through the terrain that crippled the heavily armored legionaries butchered the stretched-out Roman column. Varus, seeing that all was lost, fell on his own sword. The legions, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist. The psychological shock to Rome was immense. The empire, which saw itself as invincible, was suddenly forced to confront its own vulnerability. The Rhine River, which was supposed to be a temporary frontier, became a hardened border, a line drawn in fear. The numbers of the lost legions, 17, 18, and 19, were struck from the army rolls forever, a permanent, painful reminder of the disaster. In the years that followed, Rome's response was cautious. Tiberius, even before becoming emperor, led campaigns to stabilize the frontier, but these were more about containment than payback. The real thirst for vengeance burned in the heart of another man, Germanicus. Germanicus was the Roman ideal. He was handsome, charismatic, a gifted leader, and the son of the famous general Drusus the Elder. His very name, Germanicus, was an honor given to its father for his German victories. Now the son had to live up to it. When Augustus died in AD 14, the legions on the Rhine mutinied over their pay and service conditions. It was Germanicus who calmed them down, not just with promises, but by redirecting their rage away from Rome and towards the enemy across the river. To restore discipline, he led them on a brutal raid against the Marsi tribe. It was a preview of what was to come. Villages burned, lands devastated. The message was clear. Rome hadn't forgotten. Meanwhile, Arminius hadn't been sitting idle. His victory made him the most powerful leader in Germania, a champion of freedom against Roman tyranny. He worked to keep the bickering Germanic tribes united, knowing Rome would be back. His mission became deeply personal in AD 15, when Germanicus led a campaign that resulted in the capture of Arminius's own pregnant wife, Thusnelda. Tacitus tells us Arminius was driven into a frenzy, his fight now fueled by personal rage as much as politics. The stage was set for a clash of titans. On one side, Arminius, the brilliant guerrilla tactician fighting to protect his homeland. On the other, Germanicus, the golden child of Rome, driven by duty ambition and the burning need to avenge the ghosts of Varus's legions. The campaign of AD 15 was a critical prelude. Germanicus marched a massive army deep into German territory, eventually reaching the site of the Teutoburg disaster. Tacitus paints a grim picture: a field of whitening bones, shattered weapons, and Roman skulls nailed to trees. In nearby groves stood the barbaric altars where Roman officers had been sacrificed. Survivors of the massacre, now serving in Germanicus's army, pointed out where Varus fell and where the eagles were captured. It was a profoundly emotional experience. The soldiers, standing among the remains of their brothers in arms, were filled with a mix of sorrow and pure rage. Germanicus ordered the remains to be buried, building a funeral mound in a powerful act of closure. He laid the first piece of turf himself. While this earned him a slap on the wrist from Emperor Tiberius, who thought a general should remain above such things, it bonded Germanicus to his men like nothing else. They hadn't just seen the site of Rome's greatest shame, they had consecrated it. And now they were ready to wash it clean with enemy blood. They had recovered one of the lost eagles, but two remained. More importantly, Arminius remained. The revenge wasn't complete. The year AD 16 would see the final, terrible showdown. The year AD 16 opened with a show of Roman logistical might that was, in itself, an act of intimidation. Germanicus had learned from the near disasters of the previous year that supplying his army on land was a death trap. So this time, he would bypass the treacherous terrain entirely. He ordered the construction of a massive fleet. Ancient sources do not specify the exact number, but later accounts suggest it may have been in the hundreds, built to navigate the rivers and canals deep into Germania. It was a mobile base, a floating supply train designed to carry an army of 8 legions and their auxiliaries, as many as 70,000 men, wherever he wanted. The plan was audacious. He would sail down the Rhine, through the canals his own father had built, out into the North Sea, and up the Ems River. This would let him drop his legions deep inside enemy territory, completely outflanking the forests and swamps Arminius used so well. He was changing the rules of the game, forcing the German chieftain to fight on Roman terms. As the Romans advanced from the Ems toward the Weser River, Arminius gathered his forces. He knew he couldn't let the Romans pick a fight on open ground. Their superior discipline and heavy infantry would be decisive. His strategy was the same as always: use guerrilla tactics, hit their supply lines, and avoid a pitched battle. The two armies finally faced each other across the Weser River. Before the battle, Tacitus records a remarkable scene. Arminius stood on his side of the river and called for his brother, Flavus, who was an officer in the Roman army. When Flavus came forward, Arminius asked him how he'd lost his eye. Flavus recounted the battle and listed the rewards he'd received for his loyalty to Rome. Arminius sneered at these paltry rewards for slavery, urging his brother to remember their family and their fatherland. Flavus shot back, speaking of the greatness of Rome and the terrible fate of the conquered. The argument got so heated that the two brothers were about to attack each other across the river before being pulled back. This family drama was a perfect miniature of the entire conflict: loyalty versus liberty, the order of empire against the freedom of the tribe. Germanicus, needing to get his army across the river, sent his cavalry to secure a crossing. The Germans feigned a retreat, luring some of the Roman cavalry into an ambush, a sharp reminder that Arminius was still a master of deception. Undeterred, Germanicus moved his entire army across the Weser. A major battle was now inevitable. Arminius planned to lure the Romans into the woods, just like he had with Varus. But Germanicus was not Varus. He knew the trap, and he would choose the battlefield himself. The spot he chose was a plain called Idistaviso. It was bordered by the Weser on one side and a forested hill on the other. Open ground for the legions, but with terrain the Germans favored nearby. Arminius positioned his main force on the plain and at the edge of the forest, with his best warriors, the Cherushi, on the hills, ready to charge down and smash the Roman flank. Germanicus countered with a masterful, layered formation. In the front were Gallic and Germanic auxiliary troops and archers, meant to absorb the first shock. Behind them stood 4 veteran legions, the solid core of the army. Germanicus himself stood in the center with his elite Praetorian cohorts. The second line was made up of 4 more legions, with light infantry and archers in the rear. It was a flexible, powerful formation ready for anything. The battle began exactly as Arminius hoped. The Cherushi warriors charged down from the hills, a furious wave of men screaming for blood. They slammed into the Roman auxiliaries, and for a moment, the line buckled. But this is what Germanicus had been waiting for. As the Germans committed to their frontal assault, he unleashed his cavalry, ordering them to sweep around and smash into the rear of the charging warriors. At the same time, the main infantry line advanced with terrifying discipline. As cavalry crashed into the German rear, sowing chaos, the legions met the now disordered charge head-on. They hurled their heavy javelins, or pila, which ripped through shields and men alike. Then they drew their short swords, the gladii. In the close quarters combat that followed, Roman discipline and equipment were simply superior. The Germans, with their long spears, were at a huge disadvantage in the tight press of bodies. The legionaries working in tight formation behind their large shields became a human meat grinder. Arminius was in the thick of it, desperately trying to rally his men. He was wounded and had to smear his own blood on his face to avoid being recognized, but he managed to break free and escape on his horse. His uncle Germanicus also escaped. For their followers, there was no escape. The German line, hit from the front and the rear, collapsed completely. The rout became a slaughter. Germanicus, seeing victory, reportedly took off his helmet so his men could see him and shouted for them to take no prisoners. He wanted extermination. The Roman victory was absolute. Tacitus writes that for 10 miles the ground was covered with corpses and weapons. Fleeing Germans were cut down without mercy. Many who tried to swim across the Weser were picked off by archers or drowned. Others scrambled up trees to hide, only for Germanicus to order his archers to shoot them down like birds. Roman losses were light. The Germanic coalition was shattered. The vengeance for Teutoburg had been served, cold and bloody, on the plain of Idistaviso. After the carnage, the Roman soldiers on the battlefield hailed Tiberius as imperator. To mark their brutal triumph, they built a massive trophy mound out of the weapons of the fallen Germans. On it, they inscribed the names of the conquered tribes, a monument declaring that the army of Tiberius Caesar had subdued the peoples between the Rhine and the Elbe. But it wasn't quite over. The sight of this Roman trophy on their soil enraged the surviving Germans, who gathered for one last desperate stand at a defensive structure called the Angravarian Wall. Another battle was fought, and though the Germans fought with the courage of despair, the outcome was the same. They were routed again, their ability to fight as an organized force completely destroyed. And again, Arminius escaped, wounded but defiant. Germanicus's campaign had been a massive military success. He had devastated the lands of his enemies, defeated Arminius twice in open battle, and recovered a second of the 3 lost eagles. He had washed away the shame of the Clades Variana in blood. He believed just one more campaign season was all he needed to finally crush all resistance and conquer Germania for good. But then a message arrived from Rome. Emperor Tiberius was recalling him. Officially, it was an honor. Tiberius said that Rome's vengeance was satisfied and that Germanicus was being summoned home for a magnificent triumph and a prestigious new post. He argued it was time to let the German tribes be left to their own internal feuds and let his own son, Drusus, have a chance at glory. But according to Tacitus and some historians, the real reasons may have been far more political. Tiberius was a cautious, unpopular ruler. Germanicus was charismatic, wildly successful, and adored by the legions, a combination that could look like a threat. Some ancient sources suggest Tiberius may have been jealous of his adopted son's stunning victories. There was also a cold, hard calculation at play. The campaigns in Germania were astronomically expensive. They cost a fortune in men and supplies, all for what? A vast territory of dense forest and swamps filled with people who would never stop rebelling. Tiberius, an experienced general himself, likely decided that the price of occupying Germania was far higher than any potential reward. Roman honor was restored. It was time to be fiscally and militarily prudent. So, in AD 17, Germanicus returned to Rome. He celebrated a spectacular triumph, parading captives including Arminius's wife, Thusnelda, and their young son through the streets. He was the hero of the hour, but he would never return to Germania. His victory at Idistaviso was the high water mark. After him, no major Roman army would ever again try to conquer the region. The Rhine became the permanent border of the empire, a quiet admission that while Rome could win the battles, it had lost the war for Germania. The fates of the 2 great rivals were both tragic. Germanicus was sent to the eastern provinces, a prestigious command far from his loyal legions. Just 2 years later, in AD 19, he died in Antioch under mysterious circumstances. Many, including his grieving widow, believed he'd been poisoned on the orders of a jealous Tiberius, though no conclusive proof was ever found. Arminius didn't long outlive his rival. With the threat of Rome gone, the tribal coalition he'd built fell apart. His own ambition to be king was met with resentment. In AD 21, just 5 years after facing Germanicus at Idistaviso, Arminius was assassinated by his own kinsman, betrayed by the very people he had fought to free. In the end, the Battle of Idistaviso was a brutal, staggering Roman victory. It was the revenge they craved, and yet it was a victory that led to a strategic retreat. Germanicus won the battle, but Arminius, even in death, won the war. He had stopped the Romanization of his people and ensured that the lands east of the Rhine would forge their own destiny, forever shaping the future of Europe. The campaign of Germanicus was a textbook example of Roman military power, a terrifying response to a humiliating defeat. From logistical brilliance to tactical ferocity, the legions proved that on a field of their choosing, they were unstoppable. And yet, this overwhelming victory didn't lead to conquest. It led to a retreat, a political decision that recognized the immense cost of holding such a wild and defiant land. The saga of Germanicus and Arminius is a timeless story of 2 brilliant commanders, of honor and revenge, and ultimately a stark reminder that even the greatest empires have their limits. Thanks for watching.